So, hello everyone. We are Hannah and Diane. I'm Hannah, this is Diane. We're the moderators for the artist panel. So the artists you'll be hearing from in a moment are featured in Disconnect and Art Matters exhibition for Nuit Blanche this Saturday. You can see it up there. This show is curated with Kimberly Glassman, who's not here at the moment, as representatives of Kuja, and it is an extension of the themes of this conference. The artworks present a series of interdisciplinary fields that demonstrate the bringing together capabilities of contemporary art. We aim to create a space for dialogue and interactivity. Under the Nuit Blanche theme of remix, we compiled the works of artists whose innovative uses of both traditional and non-traditional mediums create new ways to engage with their art. The exhibition features the works of Owen, Coolidge and Timothy Thomasson, Matthew Halpenny, Diana, Lazarro, Sarah de Silva Marques, Joffré, Roy-Beauregard, and Gabriel Morin, all of whom, excluding Gabrielle, will be speaking about their projects and practices today. Please note that the presentations will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the panel, and so we'll start with Timothy and Owen.
So I guess we'll just start talking about our art practices and who we are and what we do, and then after that we can show the I'm Owen.
Timothy.
And basically, so I'm doing a double major in computation arts in the fine arts department, and then the other half is in computer science in the engineering department. So I guess I sort of approach, like people traditionally think of like art and science as like almost opposed to each other, right? And so I guess my mission is sort of showing how that's not necessarily the case. Like nowadays, like sort of technology is like woven into the fabric of society so quickly and without restraint that like we don't really even get a chance to like understand what it's doing to our culture, and like looking at technology and the way that it affects like sort of our patterns as humans. I guess it's sort of McLuhanian to like notice how like that this is actually affecting, this technology and the science is affecting us in like very significant ways, and yeah.
And I'm studying computation arts in Concordia, so it's kind of similar minus the more full-fledged computer science classes. And yeah, along the lines with Owen, I guess kind of building this sort of humanistic aspect on top of technology and really understanding and kind of delving into how technology is integrated into our lives so deeply that it's like affecting our social interactions, obviously social media. Yeah, I guess that's a good segue into our project. So the project we're showing at Nuit Blanche on Saturday is called the Mood Map. Sorry, maybe we'll just get the
Oh yeah. So originally we made this as sort of like an app type thing, which is well, I guess you can see, but like so it takes it's a website that we've made which basically mines tweets that are created in the past like few minutes, really, like it's very, very real time, and it sends all of the tweets through sentiment analysis, right? So it basically like takes all the tweets and like says like, oh, this is a positive word, this is a negative word, like that means that this tweet is, you know, like sort of angry, or this one is happy, and it's doing this for thousands and thousands of tweets every minute and compiling it all onto like this one dynamic infographic, right? So basically, it like you can discern the emotional state of all of Montreal just by looking at this one map. And of course, like we realize that tweets aren't necessarily like that accurate, but it's definitely interesting to see like what people are saying under the guise of like being online, right? Like talk about things differently. And now I'll actually show the map itself. That was the video.
So it was kind of started by trying to gain a kind of new understanding of the city, inspired sort of by the debris of the Situationists, sort of kind of imagining the city in a new way, and we're kind of putting this strange emotional lens over the different areas of the city. And it's interesting to kind of think, you kind of like notice like certain areas are always
so like, just to
angry.
explain, like this is, I mean this, on the show it's going to be, it's going to be different. I think it's going to be easier to see where's what, but this is Montreal right here, and you can see it's like red down in like, I don't know, it's like St. Henry area or something. And that means that like there are people right now tweeting like, oh, like, fuck Trump, like blah blah blah, like we see shit like that all the time. And then you can see like, so and that's another thing is seeing these tweets here like out of the context of the Twitter UI makes them almost like funnier, or like, I don't know, there's something about looking at tweets in this context that makes them like, I don't know, like,
yeah, I think it's
different. It's like very different.
Without the sort of font of Twitter and kind of the context.
Oh, and the image.
Yeah, and the person's image, it just, you see this tweet kind of in its naked form, and it's like a very sort of strange
It's
thing.
almost like pitiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess for the actual Nuit Blanche installation, this is kind of the app form, but what we're doing is we've printed a large map of Montreal, and we're just projecting the actual coloration on the map, so you get to see the map in its full form, and then the tweets will be displayed underneath it as they come in, sort of thing, and it gets dynamically updated as more tweets come in. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next presentation will be Matthew, who will be presenting their work, the Conductivity gloves.
So, before I have a few projects I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about why I got into what I do, etc. So I'm a student at Concordia for the Computational Arts Department, and before I joined this program, I took 4 or 5 years in the sciences where I was very interested in mostly biology and like ecological properties and systems and how they regulate, neurological pattern recognition, etc. And all these things I found very interesting. I noticed while I was studying them that there wasn't a lot of like rapport and discussion about the impact on society that these technologies that scientists and engineers are creating are having. So when I would try to talk to people about it, I noticed there was like a gap. Everyone was very focused on very reductionist thinking, like how can we test things, how can we prove things, etc. So I kind of thought, how can I start creating and engaging discussions in these technologies? So like a few things that I started getting into, I mainly got into like bio art, and I had like an artist named Eduardo Katz who's very inspirational to me, who kind of like takes technology and combines mediums that aren't very traditional to make people think about things that are kind of taken for granted. So one of the projects he did that inspired me was Genesis, and essentially took a passage from the Bible in Genesis, and religious bearings aside, it said, God created man in my image, and he took this, turned it into DNA sequence, and put it under a UV light. And this light was triggered by people watching the performance live. It was connected via the internet in the 90s. So whenever someone would interact with this work, it would kind of change the meaning of the message. This was kind of like a critique on how, when as a society we engage with these technologies that might have been made for something else, kind of start to slowly alter the ways we act and who we become. So I started thinking about how can I look at technologies in a new lens, combine different mediums, etc. So a few things, some of my early projects I did were things like Eno.fm, which was like a very simple project that looked at radio that used to be very broadband, broadcasted, slowly becoming internet-based, and I looked at how can we shape this paradigm of technologies being concretized. So at one point, it kind of got concretized as radio waves, then over the internet, and here I kind of made a website that instead of just listening, you're immersed in a 3D environment where the audio is reactive to your space. The current project I'm working on now is poetry.dna, and it essentially takes genetic algorithms and text and kind of, instead of thinking of AI as something that would create perfect systems, it's constantly evolving, it's temporal, so the artwork's never the same. And this Saturday, the project that I built is Conductivity, which is here. And this is kind of a project that seeks to disrupt the status quo around electronic music production. Currently, when you go see maybe like an electronic or electroacoustic performance, it's very laptop or analog gear driven, and kind of, there's a performative element that's taken out of that because of the this paradigm of being behind your laptop to perform. So if you go to like a classical concert and you see people with instruments, they have gestural motion, they're moving through the space, they're very emotive, and this is lost in contemporary electronic music. So with this project, as you can see here, I'm wearing a glove that I basically built out of fabric, conductive thread, sensors, etc., that takes your position in space and synthesizes it based on a program I wrote. So it's seeking to bring performance back into composition. It's just like a few things. This image of the glove in development, so you can see that the threading's done through the fabric. And the reason I did this was because if you're a performer, you don't want to be wearing a large, bulky electronics that'll like kind of inhibit the, not only inhibit the motion, but when you're watching a performance, you don't want your eyes to start to go like, oh, what is this technology? You want to be focused on, what's the emotion, what's it trying to say, etc. So it had to be very like sleek. There it is again in its finished version, and I built it inside Max using Max MSP, Arduino, and Adafruit software and hardware. Essentially, all the readings get processed through this and load through the speakers. And I don't have a video link here, but I'll just quickly throw that up. I'm just going to video, I guess. No, but just oops. a general idea of how it functions. And that's it.
The next artist presenting will be Diana with Synapse.
Alright, so can I just close it? Oh, okay. Alright, so a little bit of comedy there right away. Yes. Okay, so hi, my name is Diane Lazarro. I'm a fourth year here at Concordia, an international student, and a double major in intermediate and electroacoustics. So I consider myself a digital artist mostly. I have worked on different things. I've mostly been collaborating a lot with different clubs, FASA-funded clubs in Concordia. So I've organized many events. I've collaborated with Art Matters in the past. But also I've been doing performances with the Concordia Laptop Orchestra, which is here on the lower floor. Basically, it's part of the electroacoustics department. And I've done some visual art as well, like DJing. And I mostly my field of art is basically installation art, most of it, or electroacoustic kind of tracks and digital generation of visuals or sound, pretty much. So my piece right now is gonna be Synapse. It's gonna be the piece that I'm gonna show for Disconnect. I think this piece has gathered people's attention the most because it's very unique. It started off from a frustration of mine of being introduced into the electroacoustics department and becoming part of the people composing music there, but not truly being able to be at the same level as everyone else who had a background in music. Because for me it was something new that I was tackling from a purely technical point of view. And so I started thinking, well, what can I do to make my compositions more intuitive and reactive? And one thing that I thought was that they were selling these brainwave scanner kits on Amazon for $100. I was like, well, if they can read my brainwaves, maybe I can map them to different compositional parameters in a sound piece and then just let them direct everything. And I just need to think really hard about things. So I thought, well, this is an idea, so this is how I started out. You can see this is my friend who was my lab rat at the very beginning, because I thought my research would not have been as good if I had done it just on myself, because I needed to see how different people reacted to it, because if it was just my brain, maybe my brain would be a bit weird compared to everyone else. I just needed to test it on various other people to kind of understand, because basically what I was trying to do is map different brain waves to different emotional parameters, pretty much. And that came with the assumption that there's a statistical basis, and it's in which all people can reflect upon, which it's not true. A lot of people think differently, react differently to things. But basically, my scheme here is I have this brainwave scanner, which was pretty cheap, but it could gather about 8 different frequency bands. Because we emit electromagnetic waves around our brain cortex, and various devices can kind of pick up on them. And these frequency bands are really, really small frequencies, and they're measured in hertz. And you can see it here. There's delta waves is just 1 or 3 hertz, which is extremely long amplitude. Well, it's a bit hard to like explain to people that are not well versed, but basically consider they're almost imperceptible. You really can't understand they're there pretty much. And they're electromagnetic because our brain has like electricity going on that activates different like impulses, synapses, etc. So delta waves, they're the lowest frequency and they're generated in deep meditation, sleep, subconscious pretty much. And then it just goes up from there. So you got theta waves, which are a little bit higher than delta, and they kind of generate when you're like learning, when you're being intuitive. And then low and high alpha waves are generated when you're doing everyday activity and you're having immediate reactions to your surrounding. Beta waves are mostly doing tasks and activities that require a little bit more concentration and problem solving. High beta waves start becoming more like high brain processing, a little bit of strain on the mind, a little bit of anxiety. Low gamma waves are close to high beta waves in that regard. And then high gamma waves are weirdly enough connected to extreme acts of love and altruism, which is a very weird concept, but it turns out that like from scientific experiments they found out that these gamma waves are almost never there and they show up in these moments pretty much. Well, you can see right here, this was my software that basically started moving around whenever I put the head scanner on. And right behind it was like a max patch where each of these 8 parameters were linked to synthesizers or musical voices that would kind of like manipulate the flow of the track pretty much. So I divided the track into 3 parts because I thought this piece needed to be kind of immersive and kind of setting yourself into an environment. So I didn't want to have the same thing going on for like 10 minutes. So I tried to give myself different moods and tried to make it like in a 3-part adventure, you know, pretty much. So the first one is starts with drowsiness. The way I approached the composition is, it was my first experiment, so I just made sure that the brainwave parameters could control the amplitude of each voice, musical voice that I selected. So certain things like would be louder the more like certain brainwaves were prominent, pretty much. And that's about it. And the spatial mapping became very important because I originally created this piece for a 5.1 setting, which means that it would be in a surround system around the room, which also helps kind of like create this feeling of like, you know, if something's behind you, maybe it's a bit more subconscious, you can't feel it, maybe it's anxious, you know, whereas if something frontal is more like clean and clear, like there's different ways to play around it pretty much. So this was just an amplitude control exercise. The second part was emotion, and I basically changed everything because like the first part, all the voices were just basically like synths with different pitches, like with low pitches being the lower frequency waves and high pitches being the high frequency waves. On this one I put samples instead, and I tried to give a more rhythmic and kind of like movement effect. And obviously there's like, well, I've put the detail in here of like what each voice means. Like this one is just divided, like the 8 voices get conglomerated into 4 parts. So like low and high gamma waves get put together, alpha and beta, like etc. But like still like waves that are close in the range. And yeah, there's transients, rhythm, and then the high gamma, like which are the more like spiritual sides of it, get like pitched noises instead of percussions pretty much. And the last part is thoughtfulness, and yeah, like similar thing, except this one, it's similar to the first part, except I used peaks in the brainwave scan to trigger certain movements. So rather than controlling the amplitude, it's kind of like attacks. So you feel like certain thoughts coming into the composition and then fading out pretty much. And yeah, like to achieve these 3 parts, I also like scanned myself while I was trying to convey these emotions. So like this was an experiment on myself to see if I could actually compose and convey my feelings in a way that the brain scanner actually like let me convey in the music. So that's about it. I guess I'll just show, like, let people listen to. Where is it? Yeah. But yeah, if in case you're interested, you can listen to the piece on the SoundCloud that I have. It's probably going to be in the Coolidge website. And I'm also almost finished doing visuals for this piece as well, which will hopefully during the exhibition help understand better each voice. Maybe I'll like pause it so it can load a bit. But yeah, it will help understand better each voice and how it's related to the others. Especially because like this is made for a surround setting, but because it's going to be heard in headphones, I'm working so that the visuals can help communicate that surround setting at the same time. And yeah, that's about it.
She'll be presenting her Victorian embroidery singlet.
Okay, if you haven't guessed, my name is Sarah. and I'm an intermediate student doing a minor in animation. And pretty much I'm going to go through my artistic history at Concordia. First things first is the first week of my intermediate studying. We had a workshop on animation and I fell in love with it. So my very first project was animated lipstick prints, where I kissed 700 pieces of paper to create a short animation. And just heads up, never use cheap lipstick when you're doing a project like this. I did this all in one day. It dyed my skin, it dried it out, and I had a date that evening. The first thing I told him was, I swear to God, I don't have herpes. Pretty much I was proud of this project, people seemed to love it, but my professor had one problem with it. It lacked a thesis, a deeper meaning. And that started my journey in Concordia to find out that I'm a storyteller first and an artist second. Pretty much this is my first puppet ever. It was an interactive piece where she would strip down naked and then start to strip off her skin as well. Again, didn't have much of a thesis, but it was very entertaining. And pretty much I created this peep show box, which I lost the photographs for. So pretty much viewers would squint in and press a button to go frame from frame to watch this grotesque show. Teacher had a problem with this one as well. Then in my third year, I was given freedom to be narrative and antithetical, and I created Were Oyster, which was a stop motion made up entirely of fabric and fibers. So pretty much a story about a grave robber who got cursed and her head turned into a giant oyster. I showed it at a group show, and I projected it into a blanket fort. Because I enjoy blanket forts. I can't take that part away from me. When I started taking fiber classes, I started getting more into embroidery, which leads to the embroidery simulator. Oh, oops. What did I do? And pretty much this is part of a stop motion work where I drew this lovely home, and it was called Home Sweet Home, and then I tore it apart. And this is my project from last year. It was called Connie the Condom's Grand Adventure. It was a 20-minute stop motion about condoms and their civilization. When I first got this idea, it was basically inspired when I was emptying out a garbage bin after a breakup. You can probably guess why. When I started writing the script a couple years later, it was during the American elections, and that surprisingly heavily influenced my work. I incorporated race, religion, politics. So pretty much this is the main character, Connie, and a diaphragm who has post-traumatic stress disorder. This was in Art Matters last year. And it also had sacred panties. And everyone wanted to get into Jenny's panties, that's what they were called, so. And of course it was attacked by a cat, and of course you can't have a production about safe sex and contraceptives without all seeing cervical sponges that were psychic. So when I started writing this, I didn't have a thesis. It was just, I want to make something weird. And then over time I discovered, oh, a lot of symbolism here, good for me. And now to the project that's going to be presented this weekend, the Victorian Embroidery Simulator. This is a QR code that I cross-stitched myself, and I've only successfully done it twice. Because the fun thing about this is you don't know if it's going to work or not until you're completely finished it. But it's very rewarding, so pretty much people at the audience will come by with their phones and scan it, and then play my little simulator. The Victorian simulator originally was part of a class project where we had to incorporate fibers with a found object. And my idea was, hey, why not make the found object my classmates' cell phones? So instead of them secretly playing with it underneath the desk during the critique, they can whip it out. So pretty much, this project consists of different embroideries with different choose your own adventure options. So the first embroidery is of an embroidery. And it can get pretty wild. There's a sexy stable boy, there's a photographer, there's possession, and there is this creature. So a lot of different options that can happen from it. I created the, how am I doing on time? Okay. Okay. I didn't expect to talk this fast. Anyways. Yes, so pretty much I created the game on open source software called Twine. I chose it because it was A, free, B, simple for someone who doesn't really do much programming to get the hang of, and because it had a link to, it had a kind of reference to Fibers, and that was what I was working with, so yeah. And hosting the website on a free hosting service, cities where they don't put any advertisement or sell any of your data to corporations, which I'm a fan of. Okay, I talked faster than I thought, because I'm a bit nervous. Okay, might as well go back, because I forgot a point, because you're all staring at me. Pretty much when I came out with this project, people in my program who met me went, "Oh yeah, I heard about you. You're that puppet girl, right?" And I decided to go with that and use that and put out a business card saying "that weird puppet girl" and use that as our domain name. Because if you look up Sarah da Silva Marques online, you'll find a bunch of Portuguese women with fabulous hair. I don't know why. It's just I guess it's a conditioner they use. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up and go back to my signature.
So our last presentation at the artist panel will be by Joffré, and he'll be talking about his work, The Scientific Chagrin.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Joffré. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. So I am currently completing my second year here in Concordia. I'm a painting and drawing major. However, a few years ago I was far from being an art student. I completed my bachelor degree in biomedical sciences at the Université de Montréal, and I worked for a while in psychophysics, neuroscience lab. So, well, now I decided to invest myself fully into fine arts, but I think that my past experiences still have a big impact on how I engage into art making. I see my process as this way to balance my more rational mind with more personal or emotional perspective. It's like my work is like a felt response, I would say, to more rational thoughts I have on my subject matter. Talking about subjects, lately I've been focusing on our relationship with the environment, either natural or social, and especially focusing on the urban context of it. Formally, well, my work is figurative, usually implies some kind of narratives, and I would say that the process to get my pieces done is quite work intensive. I like to put a lot of details into it, and I think that's an important part of my work because it catches the attentions of people, and they interact with my piece by going from one small discovery to another, like finding some moments that they like into my pieces, and by doing so, I believe I managed to create a space and time that allows further reflections on my subject matters. So yeah, talking a bit about my process here, usually I start work, but with some readings or some kind of theoretical research. This might be some leftovers of my scientific background or whatever, but then from understanding and defining my subject, I start to create. And if this seems like very rational to engage into creation, I think that I still want to incite some kind of emotional or personal response. Like, I'd rather have my work to be felt than simply rationally understood by people. And so I think this reflects my vision of what art can be. I see it as this bridge that allows to convey knowledge from very different angles, and it highlights the fact that it's possible to know about something from so many different ways. That's a bit catchy, but Einstein said something about this. He said it would be possible to describe everything scientifically, but that it would make no sense, it would be without meaning, as if you try to describe a Beethoven symphony as a variation of wave pressure. It makes no sense, what's the point? So for my contribution to the Coolidge exposition, my work is called The Scientific Chagrin, and it was based on a reading by Marques, in which he claims that good art was art that could disrupt our conception of the world, or at least our expectations of it. And so I began to ask myself, what's that common perception of the world that we share and that I could try to tackle. And I figured that the scientific perspective, the scientific point of view was dominating stream of thoughts nowadays. And so I tried to figure out a way to challenge it in a productive way, and decided to focus on the impact of this scientific perspective on our relationship with nature. So first things first, that's my first drawing. It's an observation drawing made out of a common plant I found in the forest, and I tried to render it a bit in the style of natural history illustration. So as you probably know, through Enlightenment, natural history was considered as a scientific pursuit, and these drawings as a direct way to engage with the natural world, to find to gain knowledge of it. So these illustrations were embedded in these emerging values of rationality and man conquering over nature, and I think that with time the scientific concepts that comes along with it got more and more accepted and more popular, to the point that the scientific perspective slowly replaced the stories and myths that people used to tell themselves to explain the world that surrounded them. And this gets me to my second drawing that I don't know if you see properly, but this can literally, I think, be seen as revealing what's behind our scientific perspective of the world, the myths and the stories with their characters, narratives. Here I'm not calling for a return to the era of the myths or questioning the validity of science, but I would like to point out that with any omnipresent thought systems come very specific values and social behaviors and ways to interact with the world in general. And so nowadays we live in a world that is dominated by the scientific point of view. It's we give credibility to science no matter the issue, and so I think that it's logical to believe that our societies might have integrated some elements of the scientific method. For example, the objectivity of the scientific method is based on the distance between the researcher and its research subject. And since we've been researching and exploring so much about the natural world, it's, I think, interesting to see that in parallel we are more and more detached from nature and more surrounded by technologies, which are really scientific products, I would say. And I guess where I'm going with all of this is that, like, sorry. Yeah, nowadays, like especially in the urban context, like if you live in a big city like Montreal, the only way you're going to really interact with nature is through like man-preserved area like parks or natural reserves that are like environment where people are paid to maintain order, or through like advertisement. Like thousands of products are gonna sell you their things with image and representations of nature. And I think that all of these way we can possibly interact with nature nowadays have in common that they they picture nature as this very harmonic and peaceful environment. And that's really what I wanted to disrupt with this entire like triptych. I wanted it to feel peaceful, and then with the third drawing, bring chaos into it a little bit. So I think science, with like its efficiency to explain and take advantage of the natural world, might have alienated us from it a little bit, to the point that we understand it much better with science, but we don't feel necessarily like related to like our surrounding anymore. And like I think that this distance can have great consequences if we just think of, well, climate change, of course, but like everything that we let happening every day concerning the environment. It's not because we don't know how and why to fix it, it's because we don't feel part of it enough to take action. And I think that's maybe where the importance of art lies. I think personally, at least, that it's much more easier to relate to a wide and big concept like nature or the environment through like art, colors, characters, narratives, like the stuff that myths were once made of, really, than through scientific explanation of how and why it's going on. So, like, I think that if science nowadays is definitely essential to our societies, I would like, yeah, I'm almost done. I would like to say that, like in the future, it like could help to have like a world conception where science is balanced off with something else, and I think that this something else can be art. Well, at least that's where I like to position my art. So, thank you very much.
So we're going to invite all the artists to come up for a question period for about 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, and we can also invite our third curator up, Kimberly, who's joined us.
You guys can pull up chairs.
Yeah, just grab one. There's lots of available chairs.
So we'll open the floor for questions now for our artists. Owen?
This is more just like a comment. I don't know if any of you guys were here yesterday, but one of our professional presenters was Dr. Christian Zeltzer. And I don't know if you guys know about him, but he works between McGill and he does citation classes at Concordia, and he studied art as well as neuroscience, and he's a doctor of neuroscience, and he hosts, he has a project called Divergence, which kind of combines arts as well as science.
What's his name?
Dr. Christian Zeltzer.
It's
It's in the
the
catalog,
yeah.
so you guys should check him out because literally all of you. And he does exhibitions and whatnot. So
It should be noted, he was here yesterday, couldn't make it today, he wants to apologize, but has asked for a few of your contacts. Because he wants to meet you.
Yeah, so are there any questions? Because I have a couple for all of you. I'm taking notes. Okay, I guess I could start with the map. I'll go in order. First of all, why tweets in like of all the social media out there, I guess, like, is it because it's the most, like, maybe continually?
Well, no, it's that was more of a technical thing. I mean, I guess optimally it would be like all places where people put their thoughts on the internet. But the Twitter API is really robust. The API is basically what allows us to like bypass the actual Twitter like interface and the actual like twitter.com. Bypass that and just go straight to like their servers and like ask for specific things and like very like sort of detailed pieces of data. So it was just I think it was mostly technical. Right?
I guess that kind of speaks to our process in terms of a lot of these projects. I feel like as well as that we kind of started with a piece of technology. In our case, it was the Google Maps API and the Twitter API. And we kind of thought, like, what could this technology afford us, and how can we turn that into something meaningful? Maybe rather than kind of starting with an artistic idea and working backwards with how that can translate into the technology.
Okay, well, I guess I can read. Matt, I guess I'm wondering about like the presentation of the piece, in that as of now it's been presented as an art piece and you're performing in a gallery space, but do you want it to be something functional that an actual like electronic musician could use in like a space like that, like a concert performance, or do you want to keep it in like a rather artistic?
The goal long term was to create it for anyone who wants to be more performative. I think the main reason it's in an artistic context right now is to kind of conceptualize it and work on ideas and further develop it, to kind of run it through tests and see the reactions. And it's currently just a prototype, so there's further iterations that will be developed. And yeah, I guess I want to see how people perform with it, and maybe I can adapt the modulations and maybe make it more accessible for certain artists, or just try it out, kind of.
Right. So have you had other people perform with it so far, or has it just been you?
Right now it's just been me, because it's still wired, so I still need a connection to my laptop. But I'm developing a version that's wireless, and once I have that, it'll be easier to let other people use. Because since it's wired right now, it's kind of the motions you use are less organic, because you need to be aware of where you are in the space. But once I bring it to the next level, I hope to get tests with other artists, and eventually I would like to get a few dancers to try it out as well, because that's not something that I can do myself, or I don't feel like I can do. So yeah, it's hopefully down the line, maybe for others as well.
Right, and another question. Yeah, Nadia, go ahead.
I have a question for Matthew, and I think that too, but I think they're like related maybe. Is the performance like choreographed at all, or is it like improv? And then following on that, like how does the venue where you perform like affect it at all?
So right now it's improvisational, and that's because I wanted it to kind of be like a feedback between the space and the user. So when you're performing with the glove, you need to listen to what's happening to kind of modulate it in the direction you're going. Since it's so sensitive based on like position, and there's so much data getting read through the system, it's hard to perfectly choreograph a piece. It's more of like an experiment where like if you put your emotion into it, you can adapt to the circumstances and like slow it down or speed it up or do whatever you will. So I think the goal is to keep it within that kind of like feedback context. And the space is very important, because if the audio's not immersive, it's hard to kind of, since you're reading in a 3D space, the audio also is mapped to 3D space, so it helps to hear, like when I move my hand rotationally like this, it pans across the room. So it's important to have it kind of like, if you move your hand this way and you want the sound to flow that way, it's important that you can kind of auditorily distinguish it.
Yeah, hi. I only came in when you were showing the video clip you had, and very interesting. I wanted to know, is it kind of like a forwarding concept of like the theremin? And does it operate sound only, or sound and visuals? Or is that something coming?
For the sound and visual part, right now it's sound only.
Okay.
But in future iterations there might be visuals. I could adapt visuals to it, but the problem I'm having right now is, do I want to take away from the musical element? Because when I incorporate visuals, then it's a whole another plane. So it's possible to, but right now it's just music. And as for the theremin, it's similar in the sense that they're both experimental musical interfaces. So when the theremin came out, it was this frequency-distance relationship had never been explored before. So it was kind of like inspiring in the sense that I wanted to explore different ways to map things to sound. So I think the difference is with theremin, it's only one plane. And for me, you have a three-dimensional plane, also acceleration, velocity, rotation, basically like whatever you can imagine in a 3D space. Right. So it's much more immersive.
Andy, Ms. Mazzilli?
I have a couple of questions. So the first one is for the mood map. So do you choose words or like sentences? Like, is it just words that trigger like that's correlated to a mood, or is it like a sentence?
Like for the sentiment analysis type thing? Yeah, so what we're doing now is just words.
It's just words? Okay.
Yeah, so I mean that's sort of the thing with the sentiment analysis is like, I mean this is a problem that like everyone is having. Like if a company could figure out how to analyze like, you know, things that people write online like very accurately, that is like so ridiculously valuable. And so like that's like there's really like that's so difficult too. Like that's like crazy difficult to like understand what a sentence actually means, or for a machine to understand what a sentence actually means.
Right.
So like right now the main method is just the way we do it is we have a massive lexicon. So like I don't know, I think this one is like 5,000 words in English and then another 5,000 in French. And then every single word has a between -5 and +5 value attached to it. So like -5 is like very unhappy or like bad sentiment, and then +5 is good sentiment. And so then it loops through, looks at every single word in the tweet and like tallies up. So it's not that sophisticated, but really like people like it's a really big problem.
Because I mean the word can go up and down. The same word can go up and down the scale. My other questions for Matthew. So thank you for the presentation. I'm going to date myself a little bit. I thought a little bit about the theremin too, but also like the Nintendo glove. Is that a thing that influenced you at all?
It didn't influence me particularly, but I have heard a lot of feedback about this. And it actually, when I was doing research about sensors to use, I have 3 flex sensors in the fingers that are actually the same sensors that were used in the Power Glove for Nintendo. So there's definitely a crossover between the two.
The other day I rewatched that movie that's half promotion for Nintendo, half fiction, like The Wizard. And there's this very dramatic scene where they pull out the glove and anyway, it just, you haven't seen it, so it's a good movie.
Okay. So, I've had a hard time to understand the thinking process of your last piece, because I feel like it's really a step forward from what you showed to us before. Like what, I'm sorry, how did you like just decided to use this kind of classical ancient medium to like talk about something more like contemporary and stuff? Like I know you told us that like thinking about the theory is not really your thing and you just want to like make stuff, but like would you be able to explain how you thought about that?
Pretty much in the class we were asked to incorporate found objects into fiber art.
Okay.
And pretty much everyone was like scavenging through garbage, and I was just like, I'm not going to find something. I'll just let you guys bring the found objects. I honestly don't know, I forget what inspired me to incorporate Victorian embroidery with Choose Your Own Adventure stories. It just kind of came about. A few months earlier I was reading about twine and experimented with it a little bit, so kind of just...
How could you relate it to the alienation art scheme?
Pretty much. When I was talking with other students, actually this conversation came up a lot, how in a lot of art classes, students can feel alienated because they just want to make amazing work, but they don't want to like spend hours working on artist statement or a thesis. They just want to build and create something that they'll be proud of and happy about, and how that kind of creates an alienation in the class.
Yeah, but when you're making something, you're happy about it because like you can feel that there is something to think about in it. So like even if you don't realize it, there is a theory behind it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not going to deny that.
Okay.
But pretty much, I had one friend tell me he was told by his class that there is no room for humor in art.
Oh, so this is like, I'm just asking a question, like this is really cool, but like, is this supposed to be, like, you, how do you say that? You assume like humor in all of your pieces?
Humor just kind of sinks in a little bit. I don't mean for it to happen, it just happens. So I've learned to accept that. But one part at the end of the project I realized like, the point of the embroidery simulator is you have to focus on not getting distracted. You have to keep on working on that embroidery. If you get distracted by, say, the stable boy or your sister being possessed by a demon, you can't make your embroidery.
Okay.
And I was thinking about how a lot of people, they stare at the phones. Like phones are a mixed bag because it lets us communicate, but it also isolates us as well. So I was thinking of that, the focus you put on your phones and the focus you put in embroidery.
Okay.
Would it help if we put the website out?
Yeah, sure.
Would it help?
Yeah, it's, I also have a question for you and this project because, I mean, I'm coming from a space where I've studied craft practices and like the gendered history of craft and particularly embroidery. And so I was wondering if like the alienation of craft with fine art and the alienation of like a female gendered practice and fine art came in at all, or if that's just something I'm reading into the work, because it does seem easily applied.
Yeah, that was it's pretty much what I work at. Okay, pretty much what you're going to be seeing is an old version of the embroidery, so pretty much when I was just experimenting. Back to the alienation within female art. Actually, I only realized it afterwards, like, because I was working in net art, and usually programming is a male-dominated field, and then embroidery is a female-dominated field. But so I noticed a happy accident there. And speaking about happy accidents, when I first presented the work, my class was all excited about it, having fun, and then I realized I made a mistake in the programming. So pretty much it only went to 3 possible distractions, which were the tame ones, and then went back to the beginning. So they missed the alien, the time machine. It gets pretty elaborate.
Do you want to come here and
Yeah.
talk about
Sure.
it a little bit more? See if I do the website.
Yeah. Okay, so pretty much you're in the parlor and you have nothing to do. What do? Take down the patriarchy or embroider?
Take down the
Of course, everyone goes for take down the patriarchy first, and it leads you to the insane asylum. Okay, so it leads you to the insane asylum. The newer version, let me just see if... Okay, some issues I need to bug out before the actual show. So if you keep on going, embroider, you get multiple distractions, like a photographer who asks to take photos of you in his private studio. So, decision time, go to the private studio, get it photographed, or keep on embroidering.
Keep on embroidering.
Okay, now it's the sexy stable boy. He comes in, flirts with you. You have two options. Premarital sex, which is seeing his stallion, or screeching that you're a lady and keep on embroidering.
Keep embroidering. Avoid it at all costs.
Okay, next up, your cousin asks for your hand in marriage. Well, pretty much he asks his father and he approves. So will you marry your cousin unenthusiastically or politely decline?
Politely decline.
Good choice. Okay, your sister Winifred is screaming in tongues and she is vomiting everywhere, but no one got into your embroidery, so you're good. What do? Fetch the pastor or leave to embroider in peace?
Embroider in peace.
Oh, come on, it's your sister. Okay. Okay. Well, wormhole to another dimension appears in your room. What do?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you go through it. Okay. As soon as you step out the wormhole, it disappears. A hideous monster growls at you. What do? Promptly introduce yourself because you are a lady. Grab a nearby rock and fight for your life. Or, luckily, you brought your embroidery work, so don't pay attention to the monster and keep on working your embroidery.
Embroider.
You died. Actually, you died quite a bit in this game, so you made good choices up until now.
So yeah, I guess. Alright, I'm really excited to see the final copy on Saturday, if this is only a work in progress.
We have about 4 minutes. Do you have any other questions for the other artists before we break for a coffee break?
Well, I have another one.
Wait, we have
Oh,
one first.
yes,
Yeah,
Dr.
I have a quick question. For you, I forget your name. I'm sorry.
Diana.
Yeah. So you had like different emotions that were correlated and so on. And there was one term that you used was spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work in this context, or what does that mean in your art project?
Well, basically there's this whole range of brainwaves that are in the upper frequency range that are like gamma brainwaves, and according to studies, they appear when you're thinking of acts of altruism, or you're feeling comfortable with your loved ones, or like these kind of feelings. So what I did was trying to map them to things that I would associate with that. So for example, like high-pitched tones, warm tones, or like tonal elements. So you can kind of sense when they appear in the piece, pretty much.
So it's not necessarily associated with like prayer or meditation, it's more like altruism?
Well, I think overall the piece is very meditative, but I think it kind of provides this kind of landscape that came from my own thoughts and feelings in a way. I wouldn't know how effective it is at it, but it definitely like gets you into a meditative world or state, pretty much.
Thank you.
Oh, I guess also for Diana, I was wondering how, like you talked briefly about like sounds you associated with each level or feeling, and I was wondering if you were influenced at all by like sounds that are more traditionally associated with those feelings, or if it was like personal association, because like there's a long history of like music to represent or trigger emotion, like film scores. Like I don't have any training, but like for me, that's something I associate. And so I guess there may be like a history or repertoire of sounds that are already associated with emotions. I was wondering if like you drew from that at all, or you picked your own sounds too.
I kind of pick things for my own. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them fell into the cliche of whatever cinema connects to these, because like it's not like we can reinvent everything pretty much, but it was more like of a introspective kind of piece. Like my first experiments were with other people, but then it all kind of was born from this need of mine to be able to be more fluid in my compositions the way other people in my class were, because they had experience, they had been musicians for 10 years, 15 years, and they obviously, like, when you master a craft like that, your emotions immediately translate into the music. And for me, it was a bit more difficult because I was coming from another approach. And so, like, by doing this, I was trying to achieve that, like, that kind of connection. But yeah, so it's more introspective. I didn't really think about, like, trying to make it, like, film score-wise or stuff like that, very much.
Okay, is that all we have time for?
One more question if someone has one, but if not, no. I'll just open it to the artists. If you have questions for each other, and if not, then we'll break for coffee. You don't have to.
Yeah, one question. I've sort of been chewing on it whilst you all were speaking, and I apologize I came in late, so maybe this question is a bit out of context, but it strikes me that you're all from very different backgrounds of training, and like Joffré mentioned, you have this background in science that you're bringing down to your work. So I want to ask the kind of prickly question about ethics, because it strikes me that so much of that underlies a lot of your projects in terms of being a panel is this idea of intimacy and sort of outing the inner. So I wonder about sort of where your standpoint is on ethics in your practice in terms of how you balance gesture and technology.
With regards to our project, we, to kind of bring an ethical lens into it, we almost were using it as sort of a critique on data mining and the fact that all this information is just readily available for us, and the users of Twitter aren't aware that they're being used kind of for this art project. They'll have like, no idea that their tweets are populating this mood map kind of thing. It's, I guess, kind of a critique of that.
Yeah. Also, another thing, this is kind of crazy, is when we were first making it, we started by, when we were asking for the tweets, asking for the geolocation of the tweet when it was made. And most people have that setting turned off, that you're not allowed to know where the tweet's actually coming from. But we actually found a way around that. So it's not as accurate, but we actually, I mean, because the map is accurate, like, I mean, within a few kilometers, you can know where someone is. And I mean, that's kind of interesting. Like, people can turn it off and they actually still know where they are.
Do you have the right to do that? I know that, like, in art we can do like a lot of things without being like pursued and stuff because it's art, but like, is this legal? Because even when you no, but even when you like put some tweets like on the screen, like sometimes there is like name. Even if you like take down all the info, like there is like art and names of people.
Well, I mean,
I guess like partially it's interesting that we're using it for an artistic purpose because most of the time it's used in the corporate sphere to gain knowledge about consumers and like trends of spending, and that's kind of what it's for, honestly. And that's how Twitter makes a lot of their money.
Just a very simple question: How do you do that? How do you find your circumvent like the?
Twitter gives anyone the tool to do it. So we're using like one of our teachers. I mean, usually you have to pay actually like a lot of money to do it, but one of our teachers at Computation Arts is really great. She has some sort of, I don't know. So we're able to do it for, I don't know.
Do you need like a certain software, or like a program or a VPN or anything like just out of the ordinary of what you have on your laptop?
No, yeah, nothing out of the ordinary.
You have to get like an authentication key from Twitter.
Yeah, to be able to use their, basically, I mean, like I said, we're basically just bypassing Twitter.com. I mean, I don't know exactly how it works on their end, but like, yeah, we're like going straight into the actual source. We might even be getting the tweet before people on Twitter get them.
Just answering about like the legality, it's like when you click those terms and conditions and you accept,
Yeah.
you're literally accepting that it's becoming.
Yeah, but you're accepting that like Twitter use it and like can sell
Yeah,
all
but-
those data like to anyone, but they are not paying Twitter to get the data, just doing it. That's it.
We're still
I don't care. Like I really don't care. Like it's cool and
There's
stuff.
this artist who takes people's Instagram pictures and like screenshots them and blows them up and sells them in galleries. And
yeah, but
then
like
the people
it's
don't
called
get
like
anything.
appropriation art, and it's like a different part of like there is like some laws especially for this. I took a class, like there is a class at Concordia in art history about appropriation art, and there is like special laws about like appropriation art, but this is not appropriation. This is just like controlling like thanks to big computation knowledge that we don't have, and that's. I mean, that's what I was just asking. I feel like it's really cool, and like I said, like we have seen in art history a lot of stuff that weren't supposed to be legal, but was accepted because it was art, so it's okay. But
And on that happy note, sorry, we are running a little over time. I'll have you just finish your thought, and then we'll break for coffee for 15 minutes. And if you have other questions for the artist, I'm sure you could approach them directly. Sorry, finish your thought.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I'm pretty sure it's legal.
Thank you. After 15 minutes.